Alrighty, so as promised, I am going to talk about Sporting KC today in terms of the historic bad start to the season after 10 games and to tell you how historically bad this season has been. This is the first time we have seen in MLS history where a team have yet to register a win after 10 games, and that we have seen some bad team in MLS, and I'll definitely get to talk about the five worst team in MLS in just a bit, talk about how their start of the season was after 10 games, and none of them has actually gone 10 games without a win. And the other thing that is historically bad is the free goals that Sporting KC have scored this season is also the lowest that any team have scored after 10 games this season, and that there's even a jokes talk about how they have now got as many red cards as goals so far this season, and that kind of is true. I mean, it's hard to believe that the free red cards they have matches the exact same amount of goals, and also the points total though this season they have just as much points as the goals that they have scored this season. So yeah, so far they're 0-3-7 with 3 points, and they have scored 3 goals while allowing 15 goals, which, believe it or not, that actually is not the worst goal allowed in the Western Conference. I believe there's one other team that has a worse goal allow so far this season in the Western Conference, and their goal differential is -12, which I believe is one of the worst in the league, if not the worst in the league. But when you look at these 10 games that Sporting KC has endured, I will say this with Sporting KC, and I know this might be sugarcoating a little bit, they've at least been competitive in some of these games. And some of these games, you can say that there were definitely some bad luck involved, especially, we talked about throughout the season the problem in terms of the goal scoring. It's not because of lack of trying. I mean, there's been games where they have played well and they have really pepper the goal, but it's just because of the lack of quality in terms of finishing, and also they ran into a goalkeeper that just tends to have one of his best game when they face them. Now, in the first game that they play against the Portland Timbers, they lost 1-0 in that game with Mascara, the one that scored in the 6th minute. But when you watch that game, they actually were the better team in that game against the Timbers. I mean, they had their chances to get themselves the equalizer throughout the game, but they just weren't able to do, and that would kind of trigger a problem and almost kind of foreshadow of a even bigger problem that this Sporting case team had, because after that, when they go on the road against the Colorado Rapids, a game where they put 11 shots on goal in that one and 20 plus shot, yeah, they weren't able to solve William Yarbrough in that one, and that they also seemed very close of losing that one too. I think Colorado actually hit the post in that one, but it ends up to be a 0-0 draw. And then in the very next game, to show you how it's even more incredible in terms of how bad their finishing was, they had 11 shots on goal in the very next game too. They had, I think, like 33 shots in that game. I think that is one of the most we've seen in the league history, and probably the most that we've seen in league history in terms of shots, and not one, of course, went into the back of net against a Galaxy team. And again, part of that has to do with the fact that they couldn't solve Jonathan Bond, who was on his games. But again, just when you look at some of the finish that they have, it was just absolutely dreadful. Now, on March 18th, and again, up to this point, this is where there's the joke of, well, when exactly is Sporting KC finally able to score their first goal? Well, they finally both break that goal drought in the 11 minutes against FC Dallas, and it's Daniel Shari, the ones that break the goal drought in the 11th minute, and Sporting KC actually had a lead. So as bad as this start has been, Sporting KC actually has had leads before. They actually had leads in both of these games, but unfortunately, that lead was gone in the 55th minute with Velasco scoring, and then Jesus Ferreira scoring in the 84th minute, and Sporting KC lose 2-1 in that one. Now, the very next game, this was probably one of the two matches that you could say that, they just got absolutely blown out. And really, this game was the Jordan Morris game, because Jordan Morris went absolutely off in this one, scoring 4 goals in the 23rd, 54th, 69th, and 77 minutes. But remember, just like last game, they had a lead early in this one. It's William Agata, the one that gets the lead in the 5th minute, but then after the 23rd minute, that was the Jordan Morris show. And also, it doesn't help the fact that this is where they get the first of 3 red cards this season, with Ben Sweat getting sent off in the 53rd minute. Now, the very next week, I talked about before how, yeah, it's one thing to take a 4-1 beat down in the hands of Seattle, but the last team that they would want to face is the Philadelphia Union. But to Sporting KC credit, I think that was one of their better games that they played this season. They kept the Union in checking this one and got a 0-0 draw out of that one, which again at that point it was considered a good result. But in April 8th, when they're back home against the Colorado Rapids again, many have said that this maybe is the time where Sporting KC can finally getting their first win. I mean, Colorado, they started to kind of figure out things, but a lot of people think that this is going to be the game, knowing the fact that the Rapids don't have a good road record, and Sporting KC has a good history against Colorado when they're playing at home. Nope. Instead, their former player Diego Rubio come back to haunt them as he scored the only goal in the 68th minute with a it's 1-0 win, and that was also another game where they had some fair amount of chances, not as much as what we saw in the first meeting when they had like 11 shots on goal that they put in front of William Yarbrough's net. But yeah, they had chances in that one, and they weren't able to put one in. Now the very next game, this is also the other game where you could say that it. I think you could say that between this was probably the worst game I would say Sporting KC has played throughout this season, because I mean I know losing 4-1 to Seattle was bad, but this was really just flat throughout the entire game where they just showed no effort whatsoever. And that once Christian Espinosa scored that first goal for the Quakes, I mean it was pretty much over. Castellanos, of course, getting a red card in the 38th minute, and then Ibobasi getting the penalty in the 40th and scoring in the 51st minute. And yeah, that was, I would say that was probably one of the most impressive performances that the Quakes have put in a long time. But it's also an indictment of just Sporting KC. They've already hit rock bottom. That was just kind of drilling past rock bottom. That's when you really for any fans that maybe have not lost their mind up to that point, they've started to lose minds, and the Vermees out kind of drum was banging and probably at an all-time high after that game. Now, in the very next game against New England, this was a game where again it looked like it was going to be ugly with the way that Veroni scoring those two goals. But Johnny Russell did get one back, and up to this point, this is the last goal that they score so far this season. And that again, I thought in that game, Sporting KC had some momentum to maybe get themselves the equalizer, and then the momentum was all killed in the 61st minute when a red card, of course, has happened. And I would say that if it wasn't for New England themselves, also were being poor in terms of their finishing, this could have been a laughter. I mean, Sporting KC would have got absolutely destroyed in that one, and instead they lost 2-1 in this game. And then in the last game, this was the game where, again, many people thought that this was the game where they end the streak. I mean, I think during this bad run, there was a lot of Sporting KC fans jokingly said, or even some other fans in the league jokingly said that, well, if there is going to be a time when Sporting KC get their first win, it's got to be against Montreal, because let's face it, this is Montreal, the team that has been sitting at the bottom of the Eastern Conference for a long time. I mean, surely they can't lose to them at home, right? They lost them at home. 2-0 is the score line in that one. And while there were times where, again, they looked promising and they had their fair amount of chances, they weren't able to put away, which, again, just sums up this season for them. Goals from Bryce Duke and Matthew Frenier was the only goals that give Montreal all 3 points in this one. And pretty much set the history in terms of Sporting KC becoming the first team to go through the first 10 games without a single win, and that this is officially now the longest stretch that any MLS team has gone through without getting their first win of the season. Now, let's take a look at the five of the worst MLS teams after 10 games, because obviously the points total, and if you look at where Sporting KC is going to finish if they keep at the rate that they are, I mean they're on point of having probably the worst MLS season that any team has, and they're probably I think they're gonna hit like 10 or 11 points at the current rate that they on. Yeah, it is not very good. But when you look at the five the worst MLS team after 10 games, we look at the worst MLS team of all time in terms of winning percentage. The Tampa Bay Mutiny back in 2001, they finished the season with a 4-2-21 record. But in the first 10 games, I mean, it wasn't great, but it, it, it wasn't what we thought it was going to be a disastrous season with a 2-1-8 record. And by the way, I remember from that season when I look it up, they were injured on a multiple 7-game losing streak and toward the tail end of them playing their ninth and 10th game. That was kind of the beginning of that long losing streak that they have. So when you look at the first couple of games, they actually was pretty respectable and didn't look like they were going to be heading to a historic bad season in MLS standards. And then we look at the 2013 DC United team, and this is going to go down as probably the most polarized MLS team of all time because this team set the record for the fewest amount of wins that any MLS team has had, which again, looking at the Sporting KC side, I mean, I do think that they are going to win more than 3 games. I don't think they're going to go the whole season without a win, which that would kind of be funny to see if that is the case, but also kind of sad at the same time. No, I do think that they're going to win at least 3 games. And what make this DC United team so polarized is the fact that most of the losses that they had was mainly because they just want to punt games away because they was just solely focused on the U.S. Open Cup, similar to what we saw last year with Sporting KC when they went on a deep run in the U.S. Open Cup. There was at a point where they were almost acting like teams that made it to the CONCACAF Champions League coming out of MLS, where they're just kind of punting game away because they putting all their eggs in one basket in this competition. And unfortunately for Sporting KC, we know how that, of course, worked out, losing to Sacramento in the semifinal. But DC, it kind of worked out for them because they actually won that U.S. Open Cup despite literally having the one of the worst season and the fewest amount of wins that any MLS team has ever had to this day, with a 3-7-24 record. And even before that, when they were entering the U.S. Open Cup, they already had a bad start too. 1-1-8 was the start, and this, of course, equally one of the worst start a team has had throughout the and games start to the season, equaling what I will mention with the 2005 Chivas USA team. Then we go to the 1999 New York, New Jersey Metro Star. Now this is where it gets a little bit tricky because back in the early days of MLS in the late 90s, we still had something called shootout wins. So yeah, I mean it's kind of hard to kind of put the record. But overall, in terms of that New York, New Jersey Metro Star team, if you want to count the shootout wins, they actually had 7 wins that season, which is nowhere near in terms of a team that has the worst points total in MLS history. But again, shootout wins, I think back then only counts as a point, and in reality, they actually only won 4 games in regulation with a 4-8-20, and they had those 3 shootout wins. 2 of those 3 shootout wins came in the first 10 game of the season, and they have a 2-4-4 record. Again, depending on how you look, if you count shootout wins, they would have a 4-2-2 and 4 record. Or actually, is it that right? No, 4-2. Is that 4-2-4? Yeah, the 4-2-4 would be their start of the season, which again, very respectable to me. But again, this is we're talking about shootout wins, and this is where it gets kind of very tricky to talk about it. But still, that is considered one of the worst team in MLS history, and I think the New York, New Jersey Metro Star only got like 15 points that season. Then we talk about the first 2 expansion team in MLS history with Chivas USA and RSL. Both of them actually have two of the worst season, not only in MLS history, but to this day in expansion season. Chivas USA, of course, unfortunately has that indiction of the worst season, expansion season in MLS history, with a 4-6-22 record, and have a 1-1-8 record to start the season, equaling what DC United had in 2013. And then the Real Salt Lake team back in 2005, 3-2-5 to start the season, but ultimately they finished 5-5-22. And I gotta say, up to that point, when RSL had that 3-2-5 start of the season, it was not bad. I mean, I would say that the 2005 Real Salt Lake team is very similar to the FC Cincinnati team back in 2019. Where remember when FC Cincinnati came into the league and they had a respectable record, at least in the first couple of games, and then they just collapsed. They just went into cradle mode and finished with only 6 wins that season, and that was kind of what was for RSL. And again, this is back when in 2005 in the with these expansion team. They don't get the same benefit we see with some of these expansion team. I mean, I don't remember they actually had an expansion draft back then. I'm pretty sure they did, but obviously the prospect of the expansion draft is nowhere near of what we see now days. And obviously these team also don't get a chance in terms of all these gam tam kind of they get get when they start their life in MLS. So it wasn't a big surprise when we talk about expansion team are not supposed to be good, and to this day it's still kind of reign true. But it especially rang true in the early days of MLS, where if you're an expansion team coming into the league, yeah, you're gonna suck, and you're gonna suck for a long time. When you look at some of those early days of expansion team, in fact, I'll probably might even do a video talk about the early days of expansion team. Not a lot of them were very successful. I mean, the only the exception you could say in terms of expansion team, and remember how I said they were like the first two expansion team? I actually lied. The Chicago Fire actually technically was the first expansion team back in 97, although they entered the league in 98, and they're kind of really the exception with them going all the way to MLS Cup and winning the whole thing. Uh, but other than that, those early the expansion team coming into the league, they were just historically bad when they came into the league and came into MLS. But now let's take a look at the next 10 games for Sporting KC, because you wonder, when is this winless run going to come to end? When is finally they're going to end this historic bad start to the season and getting their first win of the year? Well, it's probably not going to be the next game, because the upcoming game that Sporting KC has to play is on the road against the Seattle Sounders. And knowing the fact that the Sounders are probably going to be playing angry, knowing they drop points against RSL on the road, yeah, this is probably not going to be pretty. And especially in the first game when they play against Seattle, where that was the Jordan Morris show. Yeah, Jordan Morris is licking his chop and wanted to face Sporting KC again after that incredible performance he had in the last game. So yeah, that probably is unlikely where the streak is going to come to an end. But the following week, that is going to be the game where I think if I had to pick a game where Sporting KC is going to get their first win, it's going to be against Minnesota, because again, this team has never lost to Minnesota when they're playing at Children Mercy Park, and knowing the fact that the Loons has not had a good run in the last couple of games, especially I even mentioned Minnesota started kind of becoming like Sporting KC in a way where they've also had their trouble in terms of goal scoring. That is another game where Sporting KC could get their first win, and I think most likely that is going to be do so, because if that's not going to be the game that they get their first win, oh boy, it's going to be a while, because then they go to face against LAFC. That probably is going to be a loss against LAFC, especially up to that point, depending on what happened later tonight. Oh well, actually, even depending on whether or not LAFC would make it to the CONCACAF Champions League final. I think CCL final doesn't actually kick off until like around June. I might be mistaken, but even if it's a weak LAFC team, we have seen before where LAFC, even with their second team, yeah, this is considered one of the toughest team to beat, and that especially for Sporting KC to go on road against LAFC, I don't fear that they get a good chance in terms of winning that. And then of course facing against St. Louis City, which St. Louis has started to show some vulnerability in the last couple of games, but even then, that's a daunting task for Sporting KC to do, to go on the road against St. Louis. Although, I mean, you could say that maybe the thing that will at least give Sporting KC some sort of advantage is the fact that it is a rivalry game, and in a rivalry game, things can be a little bit different. I'm pretty sure their players are going to be up for that game. Then they go back home to play against the Portland Timbers, a team that they lost on the opening weekend. And again, this is the Timber side that started to heat up lately. And they, of course, play against FC Dallas at home, which is another game where I could say that they could. That's another one where they could get their first win, because Dallas on the road is not the same Dallas that we see when they're playing at home. Then they go on the road against the Vancouver Whitecaps. Again, that could be maybe be a win, because Vancouver this season hasn't been that good at home. Then they go to play at home against Austin FC, another game where this could be an opportunity, because Austin themselves are really struggling this season. But then they play at home again, and this time they face against LAFC. Yeah, that probably is not going to be a win for them. And then they play the other LA team the following couple of days, and they actually go on the road to play against the Galaxy, and that could be interesting in kind of game, especially when we saw the first time when both of these teams meet against each other. I mean, I really think out of all these games that they could have got their first win, the game where they play against the Galaxy should have been the one that they got their first win of the season. But either way, if you're a Sporting KC fan, let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this video, and what do you think, in terms of these next 10 games, when are they going to get their first win of the season? And also, is this going to be on point of we're going to look back at this team going through a historic bad season? Because I know right now, there's been a lot of rumblings about Peter Vermees need to get fired and yada yada and so forth. Still don't think Vermees is going to be fired. I mean, the front office after giving him a 5-year contract, I think unless if this gets even worse in terms of the next 10 games, and let's just say that if they go through this next 10 games and still have not get a win, maybe they might have to do it, even though it's gonna be a bad look on their part after giving the 5-year contract and then basically decide to fire him. But yeah, this is really bad in terms of how the start of the season that they have got. And I mentioned even before in the review, this team just looks simply broken. And the only way for this team to unbroke themselves is they need to get a win. Like a win will definitely cure this team, and that we've seen before when teams go through a really long losing streak, and we've seen teams that go through like 10 plus a game without a win, and even some in an extreme way like 15 games without a win definitely will cure everything and maybe boost the morale of the locker room, because the morale level of this Sporting KC team is just at an all-time low. I mean, you look at that interview that Johnny Russell did after the game against Montreal. He looked like a broken man, and I don't think he's the only player that feels like it. I think every single player in that Sporting KC team just looks simply broken, and they just don't know how they're going to end this, and unless if they eventually find a way to end this and lift themselves up, we could looking toward a season that could be in a historic bad level that we have not seen since what we talk about these five worst MLS team after their 10 games that we mentioned. But either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure guys you like, smash the subscribe button. Like I said, let me know in the comments below what do you think of this game, and if you're a Sporting KC fan, when exactly is this winless run is going to come to an end. But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.